Welcome to Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones. In this empowering podcast, we delve into fatherhood and custody rights.
Welcome to Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones. I'm Sam Henniger, and I'm excited to meet with Jana today. We're going to get started. Jana, tell us a bit about your story and what inspired you to become a family law attorney, and particularly focusing on advocating for fathers.
Yeah, so what inspired me to become an attorney in general was Phylicia Rashad on the Cosby Show. I've always admired her, and she was kind of like a TV mom to me, and I just wanted to be like her. So law has been something that I thought that I wanted to pursue since I was very young. And then once I got into law school, I had some interest in family law, but I actually never took a family law course. It wasn't until I got out and decided to open up my firm in 2009 and needed to figure out what I was going to do that I started talking to some attorneys in town. And one really prominent African-American family law attorney was Billy Ellerby. And he became my mentor when I first started practicing. And so I just kind of fell in love with family law from there.
How about we back up just a bit and tell us what your education was in, and then maybe fill in a bit more of those gaps on what led you into law.
Yeah, so in undergrad, I went to Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels. I studied sociology, and I have always found people fascinating. Myself, I'm an introvert, but I find groups of people and stories about people really fascinating. And I love to read and just kind of be nosy, frankly. I find people really interesting. And so practicing law kind of made sense. Once I went into undergrad, I knew ultimately that I wanted to go to law school. So I decided to pick a major that I thought was going to be interesting. And sociology is definitely that. It's kind of the study of people. The study of people in different points in their lives. And I think it was a really good preparation for kind of the practice of law more than studying in law school. So then from sociology background, I went into studying law at North Carolina Central University. And that is where I got my law degree.
I'm a psychology grad myself, so the study of people is endlessly fascinating. And I'm interested to hear a bit more about that mentoring relationship that you had entering into family law and what it was that inspired you to specifically start helping with fathers.
Yeah, so when it comes to family law, you're dealing with divorce, you're dealing with custody, you're dealing with child support. It might be adoptions. There's juvenile parts of it, which is abuse and neglect and dependency. So family law can be a really big myriad area of things. And a lot of times people think it even includes things like estate planning and wills and trusts and stuff. And that really is a separate area of law. It's more of an estate planning side of things. But in any event, throughout all of those different kind of pockets, my niche became custody because to me, children are the most important thing to fight about, right? Money comes and goes. Relationships hopefully last forever, but sometimes they don't. But your children are your children, they're your blood. And if there's anything worth fighting over, it's the kids. And so that's kind of the catalyst and the drive behind why I do what I do and why it's the most important thing to me. When it comes to dads specifically, my parents had a really rough relationship. They were married for the majority of my childhood and adulthood. However, it was not a good marriage. And my dad was not a good husband, frankly. He was an incredible father to me, though. And my mother, even though she was very frustrated with the husband that my father was, never tried to speak down about my dad to me and the relationship that we had. She always supported that. She knew I was a daddy's girl, and she, didn't envy that at all. She understood she had been a daddy's girl herself as a child. And so I think it's just really monumental, the impact that fathers make on their children, especially their daughters. And if I can be a part of making sure that I can protect that, I want to be.
Tell more of this story about how you more stepped into that through that mentor of yours.
Yeah, so when I decided to open my firm, I spoke to another prominent African-American attorney, James Ferguson, and he asked me, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I think maybe family law. And so Billy Ellerby was at the top of the list. He gave him a call, said, hey, I got a new attorney here. She's interested in family law. Billy said, send her over, and kind of the rest was history. He kind of took me under his wing. He let me kind of practice on some of his cases, sit in on consultations, sit in court when he had hearings. I even represented one of his clients in a hearing for him to kind of get some practice. So he really just kind of rolled it out for me and really helped me understand what it is to be a family law attorney.
And what would you say, thinking about this, there are certainly a lot of horror stories, perhaps, when it comes to dads and how these things can play out in the courts. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what are some misconceptions or challenges that you've encountered when advocating for fathers in family law cases?
Well, I've actually been really fortunate. Here in Mecklenburg County, where I practice family law exclusively, the judges are very thoughtful. And there is not the antiquated, well, since the kids are young or since mom is mom, the kids should be with mom and dad should just get some kind of visitation. That is not the standard. Generally speaking, the judges see the parents as equals and really want to hear the facts and circumstances as to which schedule is going to be the most appropriate. So I'm fortunate in that I'm not fighting bigotry, right? Or sexism, kind of the reverse of what we usually experience. But it is still important, because a lot of times, women are detail oriented, right? And so it's important to highlight the things that fathers do that may not be those detail oriented things, but are just as important coming from a different perspective. And so I always try to make sure that I illustrate that in any type of trial in front of a judge.
What effective strategies have you used to help fathers navigate child custody and visitation disputes?
So I think the most important thing to assure fathers of is that they are parents with equal rights to mom. I think a lot of times there is a general assumption that mom is just going to get custody and he's going to get, some type of visitation schedule, and it just is what it is, and it's not worth fighting for. And a lot of times, I wouldn't say a lot of times, but sometimes my dads come in with that assumption. And I quickly tell them that that's not the case. I mean, if that is what you're looking for, then absolutely, we can get that for you. But if you're looking for joint custody, if you're looking for primary custody, then that may be worth fighting for. And you shouldn't just assume that you're never going to be able to get it. Again, facts and circumstances have a lot to do with how cases play out. But generally speaking, that's the first thing that I want to make sure is that dads understand that they are equal parents. There's a constitutionally protected right to be a parent, and that means parent, not mom, not dad, parent, period.
What do you do to help ensure fair treatment of fathers in the legal system regarding things like child support and parenting time?
So when it comes to child support, the way North Carolina calculates child support is based on the gross incomes of the parties. If you've got two parents that are W-2 employees, that's going to be pretty straightforward. You're looking at pay stubs, you're looking at year to date. If you've got someone who is a business owner, things can get a little bit more complicated. If you get someone who works under the table, that gets more complicated. So there are mechanisms that the law gives us to try to find that kind of financial information. But, nothing is perfect. And I tell folks, if they get away with it with the IRS, they're probably going to get away with it in state court in Mecklenburg County. We're not sleuths, right? I went to law school. I did not get an MBA. I don't like math. So I can't find money. But there are mechanisms out there in the legal system that allow us to try to get more of that type of information. When it comes to fathers who may be paying child support, the most important thing is to make sure that their income is calculated correctly, and that, assuming it's mom's income is calculated correctly as well.
Can you tell me more about how it is you work in terms of mediation when it comes to these disputes, especially when advocating for your dad clients?
Yeah, so I'm a real big proponent of mediation. When you are in litigation, you are handing facts and circumstances to a neutral third party. They are going to hear your facts and circumstances for an hour or two to a couple of days, depending on the complexity of the case. And then they're going to make a determination that is going to affect the rest of your life. And no matter what kind of case you put on, no judge is ever going to know everything. They can't. And then the rules of evidence don't even let us bring in some things, right? Sometimes that ruling doesn't really reflect what's fair. With mediation, there's a little bit more leeway to really work towards a fair agreement. And I think that ultimately helps everybody kind of move past this new stage and turn over a new leaf. I just had a mediation earlier this week, and we were able to settle all of the issues that were pending. So we don't have to worry about litigating at all in his case. And that's a big relief to him. That's a savings to him, right? It's far more expensive to litigate than it is to mediate. And the parties were able to actually hear each other because there was a neutral going back and forth between the rooms, kind of telling that person's side of things. And the emotion that you have when you're trying to talk to your ex-partner about anything contentious isn't there with the neutral because there's no emotional connection there. It's just the facts. And sometimes when people get a chance to just hear the facts, they're able to move past certain, hurts that would cause them to make decisions that are much more based on emotion than what's really in their best interest.
That makes a lot of sense. And I definitely see the value of having a mediator helping keep things cool in the room, so to speak. What perhaps you might say is your human touch, because you're dealing with clients who are going through maybe one of the most stressful things a person can go through. And so while mediation occurs and it's great to have that cool head to help you make better decisions, how else do you operate with your clients human to human?
Yeah, so the first step in hiring me is always a consultation. And what I tell folks is that's really just a conversation. I'm taking some notes, but I'm not taking copious notes. I'm really trying to understand your perspective and what it is that you're wanting to have happen ultimately, right? Somebody may be reaching out to me about violation of an order and their options for that. But what they really want is a different order altogether, right? And you have to listen to those things to really dig deep and find out what it is that they're looking for. And so that consultation is kind of the beginning of the relationship. I really believe in communication. So unfortunately, I can't talk to all my clients all day long, right? I got to work, I got to go to court, I got mediations, etc. But I really try to be accessible via email and get back to folks within at least a business day or two, assuming that there's not something that I'm already scheduled in, so that they can get their questions answered. I think communication is something that is monumental when it comes to these types of legal matters. Things can change on a dime. You may come and you wanted one thing. Some time passes and now you want something different. And it's really important to be able to communicate that kind of update to your counsel. So communication would definitely be at the top of the list.
What advice would you give fathers facing these legal challenges regarding their parental rights?
So the first thing is get a consultation, right? Know your rights and have a third party tell you that. Sometimes, again, they need to hear that they're entitled to time, right? Whatever they did, however the relationship ended, whoever's fault it may have been, they're still the parent and that child still needs them. And so I think it's really important in that consultation to hear that. And then to get some kind of actionable items. I tell a lot of my dads, reclaim your time. A lot of times I see dads get bullied into a schedule. And the challenge with that becomes how long that schedule has been going on. From the court's perspective, they're not there to figure out what's fair to mom or dad and dad, or mom and mom. They are there to determine what is in the best interest of the child. And so if that child has become accustomed to a schedule where dad is only seeing the child every other weekend, for instance, and that's gone on for 6 months or a year, you've got a real uphill battle to prove to a court that it's going to be in the child's best interest to change up that schedule. Is that fair to dad? No, right? He wants more time than that. Maybe he's been asking for more time than that, and mom just hasn't been willing to give it to him. But the sooner, the better. So obviously try to work things out amongst yourselves. There are plenty of cases in the legal system, and you don't want to jump in that line if you can avoid it. But if it cannot be avoided, the best thing that you can do is to set yourself up for success by reclaiming your time. So mom's entitled to her time, you're entitled to the same time. Do not let mom bully you into a schedule.
Any other little pieces there? Because it does sound like making sure you use what you have, that helps prevent further complications. What else might a dad be thinking about more effectively in terms of keeping what he wants or getting more of what he wants by the time he gets a lawyer involved?
I would say document everything. Again, if we're going down the road of litigation, evidence is important. So your testimony is always your most important piece of evidence. You want to be credible, you want to be honest, you want to be factual, but you want exhibits that support the testimony that you're giving. And if you are being accused of never reaching out to spend time with the children, You want to show text messages and emails reaching out to mom saying, hey, I'd like to get the kids this weekend. Can I pick them up from school? I'd like to take them to see, this family member during the summer. You want to have that kind of documentation. So along with reclaiming your time, you want to document everything.
Jana, what motivates you to continue advocating for dads in the legal field?
I would say that it is my clients. I've had a lot of success with my business, but I've had a lot of referrals. I have a lot of repeat business, dads that we get custody orders, and then unfortunately mom won't follow it. And now we're back in court dealing with the contempt. They make me so happy because I know that those relationships with those children are so important to them and so important to those kids. And I know that kind of balance of having them in their lives along with mom is going to make for a much more positive and resilient adult, right? And that's what we want to see in the world. We want the next generation to do better than us.
Jana, I really appreciate what you've shared with us. And I'm remembering back just earlier in this conversation, you mentioning how your relationship with your dad was so important to you. And that was really, I think, maybe one of the golden threads that's led you through your life. And so I'd love to hear more about that relationship and how you see that coming up in your work as you're working with these dads who have kids as well as you were your father's daughter and seeing that relationship play out in other lives.
Yeah. So, as a young child, my dad was my hero. He could do no wrong. I got older. I started understanding the dynamics of what was going on in my parents' relationship, and I could see things from my mom's side. But again, as I mentioned, my mom never shared any of that kind of stuff with me, never vented to me about that kind of stuff. She probably rolled her eyes plenty of times without looking at me with some of the things I would say because I was always team dad. But nevertheless, our relationship was really solid. He was a cab driver when I was young. And so he worked nights. My mom was a secretary, so she worked days. And so I remember in the summers, he would tell me, all right, baby, let me get some sleep. And then once he woke up, like late morning, we would go to swim at the aquatic center, or we would go to the park and fly kites. We would go get Pringles and stare at the clouds and talk about what shapes we saw. He taught me how to play dominoes. I mean, we had a really great bond and a great relationship. And part of that was because my mom was so supportive of it. Again, they had a very tumultuous relationship. I heard far more than I should have when it came to arguments. I knew they were not happy, but it never affected the relationship that my dad and I had.
Tell me more about how you see that coming up in the families you work with.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that once the relationship goes south, whoever feels aggrieved or like the victim in the relationship wants to use the kids to kind of punish the other parent. And that's not to say that the dads are always the one cheating, but if you're in that kind of classic scenario and that's what's going on, then I think sometimes moms forget that it's not about you, it's about the kids. And if he's a good dad, then that should be all that matters. You're done with him, and you should be. Right? But those children still need a father. They still have a father. And if that father is ready, willing, and able to be a part of their lives, you don't want to stand in the way of that. You don't know what kind of effect that might have on them later in life. And your kids are supposed to be the most important thing. So you kind of have to push past that hurt and think about the bigger picture and focus on the kids. And if you're focusing on the kids, you're always going to make the right decision for the kids. If you're focusing on your hurt or the betrayal, then you start making decisions based on emotion, not what's best for the kids.
Jana, I just want to thank you again. You really highlighted a couple of really practical pieces of advice for dads who are in these types of situations. And I really appreciate you sharing a bit of your motivation and story, particularly that last bit about thinking about what's best for the kids.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Sam.
This has been Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones. I'm Sam Henninger. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, because we're going to have a lot of more great conversations just like this. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos like this one. And be sure to follow us on social media.